Yeah, thank you for having me. So I'm Eleanor Baker, the monitoring officer for the Southwest Peatland Partnership. So I'll start with an introduction as to who we are. So the Southwest Peatland Partnership is a peatland restoration project. We are funded by Natural England's Nature for Climate Peatland Grant Scheme, otherwise known as NCPGS, with additional funding from Southwest Water, Duchy of Cornwall, the National Trust. We're a collective of 20, of over 20, sorry, organisations, landowners, commoners, farmers, charities, contractors, volunteers, local interest groups, and we work across Dartmoor, Exmoor, Bodmin Moor, and West Penwith to positively change the future of our peatlands. So there we are, that's our team. Currently, we're about 15.
Sorry, we can't see
Oh,
the slides at the moment.
sorry.
That's all right.
Let me see if I can go back. Mm, is that,
I can't currently see anything. Oh, here we go.
how about
Fantastic. Thank you.
that? All right, thank you. Yeah, so we're about 15, a team of about 15 people employed via Southwest Water, Dartmoor National Park, and the National Trust. So I'll start with an introduction to what is peat. So peat forms in areas that have a consistently high water table. This creates a highly wet and anoxic oxygen poor environment where dead plant matter isn't able to fully decompose. So over time, this undecomposed plant matter accumulates, and that is what forms peat in a nutshell. It's an incredibly slow process, so it accumulates at around 1 millimetre a year, roughly on average. And there are multiple different peatland habitats around. So we have blanket bogs, which forms on the tops of hills and is fed only by rainwater, valley mires, which are fed by groundwater, and then raised bogs, which is essentially a valley mire where so much peat has accumulated that it's now risen as a mound and is now dependent on rainwater to maintain its high water table. So in the southwest, we're predominantly working with blanket bogs and valley mires, although there is one example of a raised bog on Dartmoor called Tor Royal, on which we have actually done some restoration work. So here's a diagram to show you the importance of the water table within peat. So the Cattertown that you can see is the area of peat that's permanently underwater. This part of the peat stays anoxic and preserves all of the peat, all of the undecomposed plant matter that has formed there. The Aquatown is the top section of the peat where the water table rises and falls according to rainfall. And a healthy hydrologically functioning peatland will have a water table that sits around 20 centimetres within that top surface of the peat layer. And a good healthy peat is actually around 80% water and only 20% organic matter. So very, very wet environments. But the real star of the show is sphagnum moss. So sphagnum moss is really what makes peatlands what they are. So they are really wet, low nutrient environments. And these mosses are the ecosystem engineers that really makes them what they are. So they grow best in wet, low nutrient, acidic conditions, but then they themselves work to enhance those conditions. So through processes like cation exchange, they actually make the environment around them much more acidic. They can store around 20 times their own mass in water, so they help to retain moisture in the top layers of the peat during the drought seasons and periods of drought. And so they're an ecosystem engineer. So they essentially make the environment better for themselves. And it's this kind of unique environment that allows the other key bog species, which have adapted to survive alongside them, thrive. So species like sundews and cotton grasses. They're also really beautiful on a tiny micro scale and really, really hard to identify. Really, really challenging to do. So where is peat globally? So 90% of our peatlands is in the Northern Hemisphere, where it's cooler and wetter. There is a small amount of peat in the tropical zones, which forms beneath rainforests. I know very, very little about that. It's quite a different environment from my understanding. But the UK is a really important stronghold for blanket bogs specifically. So 20% of the world's blanket bogs are found in the UK. And then where do we work? So this is the Natural England peat map. The blue areas that you can see is areas of peat. It's not completely accurate. There are some anomalies in there. There are some strange little points that pop up on that map where there aren't peat. For example, one of my colleagues' back gardens pops up in that map. But you can see the areas that we work in. So we work on Exmoor, Dartmoor and Bodmin Moor. So why are they so important? They support some really unique habitat specialists. So we have the emperor moth, plant species such as the pale butterwort, which is in the middle, and the sundew. Those two are really special because they're insectivorous plants. So something that people usually associate with really kind of like more tropical habitats, things like pitcher plants. But actually, a lot of people are surprised to find we have insectivorous plants in the UK, which is really cool. And they are specially adapted to survive in incredibly low nutrient and acidic environments like blanket bogs. I find that sometimes these habitats get a little bit overlooked because they are a little less glamorous, a little harsher than others that you might find around the UK, but they are incredibly beautiful. You just have to kind of learn to look on a smaller scale. It involves a lot of getting on your knees and staring at the ground. So peatlands are also incredibly important because of their carbon storage ability. So although peat covers only about 3% of the world's surface, peatlands hold nearly 30% of all of the soil carbon on Earth. And that is all down to that slow accumulation of dead plant matter where it isn't decomposed. And all that carbon then gets locked into the peat and held under that water table. However, when they're damaged, they very quickly turn into carbon emitters. So when they're no longer hydrologically functioning and the water table drops too far for too long, that exposes all of that undecomposed plant matter, all of that peat, to oxygen, and it allows it to start to decompose, which means that all of that ancient carbon that's been locked up inside that peat is then starting to be released into the atmosphere. So for us, restoring them is not only important to mitigate against climate emissions, but also to keep that ancient carbon locked up and underground. Which leads me on to my next point, that very sadly, the large majority of the UK's peatlands are in quite a poor condition. So the University of Exeter did a study a while ago, and they found that roughly 1% of Dartmoor's blanket bog is actually hydrologically intact. And a lot of our peat is damaged across the UK for a number of reasons. So in the past, they've been drained for forestry and for improved grazing. Peat has been cut as a source of fuel. These areas have been used for military practices, which has also created erosion features. And in some of those areas, actually, you can still see the bomb craters in the ground when you look at aerial images. And vast valleys have been impacted by things like tin streaming, which is specific to the southwest. So all of these practices have had a very negative impact on the condition of the peat, and has also negatively impacted its hydrology. These features, although they're no longer active, so all along these peat cuttings have now, in the southwest, these peat cuttings have now become revegetated. They are still there, and they are still actively draining the peatland around them. This image that you see is a particularly bad example of an erosion gully. This is, if you know it, this is in an area called the Tavy Head, up near Firtool, the most remote part of Dartmoor. And that erosion gully is about 6 meters deep. So you can see my colleague standing in there for a good idea of scale. It's absolutely huge. So where do we fit into this picture, and what do we do? So the South West Peatland Partnership, we attempt to repair as much of the damage as we possibly can and restore the hydrological functioning of the landscapes. So we are all about restoring hydrological functioning. That is the main practice that we carry out. We have worked across vast areas and have so far worked to restore around 5,000 hectares of peat in the southwest. We try and turn these landscapes from the millennia, the purple moorgrass dominated deserts like you see on the right hand side of that image, into landscapes that hold water all year round, like you see on the left. So This is a really good picture of a site called Hanging Stone Hill, where you have an area of restoration sitting right next to an area that hasn't been restored. And you can see the difference in the amount of water that's being held there is quite phenomenal. And we hope that once we have restored that that hydrological functioning, that the ecological functioning will then follow swiftly afterwards. So I'm going to show you some examples of some sites here. So this is a site called Tor Royal. You've got a before and after. So before on the left and after on the right. So you can see this kind of central ditch, which has been dug into the peat here to drain it, to improve it. You've also got an area here of peat cuttings kind of adjacent to that. You can see these kind of parallel lines. Those are old peat cuttings that have now revegetated over. And up on the top right, you can see a network of old ditches and field boundaries as well, where previously there have been attempts to try and improve and farm on this site, but of course their characteristic is that they're really low nutrient and incredibly acidic, and very, very wet. So probably wasn't very successful. So although this is quite a nice site in terms of its quality, this kind of drainage ditch running through the centre of it is having a huge impact and will slowly cause it to degrade over time. So if we don't come in when we do, gradually all of the peat will be dried out, degraded, and eventually lost. So you can see on the right-hand image where we have come along and we have put ditches in. Sorry, no, we've not put ditches in, the exact opposite. We've put blocks into the ditches to try and hold the water back. And those dark patches that you can see is the surface of the water. And often when you block those ditches, the refilling with water is incredibly fast, which just goes to show how much water is being lost all the time. So sometimes these ditches, we block them up and the water table lifts and fills behind them within a matter of hours or a day. This is another site called Ockerton Court. So you can see those little dark circles in there. Those are bomb craters, which have made natural pools. But you can also see kind of like the roughness in the texture. That is all erosion features. So that is where the peat has become damaged and degraded and has started to erode away down off the hillside. And then this is it after restoration. So this is a network of pools which have been created as a result of blocking up those ditches and those erosion features to try and hold the water back in the landscape and raise the water table back up. It can be quite hard to get a concept of the scale of this work as well. So this is a short video which hopefully should work to show you the sort of scale that we're working across. So again, this is, I'm going to skip it along, but there we go. This is up near Tavy Head again. This is one of our biggest sites that we've worked on. And because this was taken on a day when it's really cold, so you can see everything is frozen over, it highlights really well all those little white dots that you're seeing. That's all restoration. And those are all pools that are being created in the landscape as a result of blocking up erosion, ditches and gullies. So it's restoration on a really large scale. It also looks really beautiful. And it catches the light like this. It's very hard to see when you're on the ground because these landscapes are quite flat and fairly featureless. So actually the best view you can get of the work is from aerial footage. So although we create lots of pools by blocking up the ditches, the long-term aim is that these pools will be recolonized with those sphagnum mosses that I showed you at the beginning of the presentation. This happens at varying speeds. Sometimes it's incredibly fast, sometimes it takes a lot longer. The smaller the pools are, the faster they recolonize with sphagnum mosses. They don't like wave action from very big pools. And the hope is that the sphagnum mosses will recolonize those pools, start to change the environment to make it possible for peat to form again. And the sphagnum mosses themselves, as they grow and die and fall to the bottom of the pools, they are starting to form peat through that process. So we do hope to see all those pools gradually turning nice and green and filled with mosses. So how do we do it? We do it using specialized equipment, so diggers with really wide tracks that have an incredibly low surface pressure, lower than a human footprint. So what this does is it reduces the impact of the machinery on the peat. They also have special 360-degree rotator cuffs on for the buckets. That means that the contractor drivers can drive up to where they're going to work, park up, and they can sit and they can work there, and they don't have to move the digger back and forth like you do with a traditional digger that doesn't have those rotating cuffs. So again, reducing impact on the peat. The contractors that we use are also incredibly skilled digger drivers. It's quite amazing to watch them working, like the dexterity with which they can work, and actually these great big bits of kit being used to be kind of like quite gentle and delicate is, yeah, it's quite mesmerizing to see actually. Um, and then we have on occasion where we've got sites that are incredibly remote and we need to use heavy materials like stone, have used helicopters, but we've only used these on a very small number of occasions. And this has been where taking that material out to the site would cause too much damage to the peat because of the weight of it and the pieces of kit that we would need to use to get it there. And also, it's a lot faster as well. So it would take weeks of back and forth with a track dumper versus a day or two with a helicopter. Doesn't come without its challenges. They're really harsh environments to work in, very cold, very wet, very windy, very misty. It's not very glamorous work, but the team are really passionate, and so are our contractors, and they love it, and they get great satisfaction out of what they do. And then how do we know if it's working? So that's where myself and my colleague Eddie come in. So we make up the monitoring team. So we monitor a variety of environmental parameters. We measure the hydrology. So we use dip wells. You can see at Eddie's feet in the right-hand picture, the small black pipe. That's a dip well. So that sits in the ground. It's got a little logger that drops down into the pipe, and that measures the height of the water table underneath. And we try and install dip wells up to a year before restoration takes place, and then for as long as possible afterwards, so that we can monitor to see how the water table depth has changed in relation to the work that we've carried out. It helps us to learn where techniques maybe aren't working so well, what we can do differently. So we install these dip wells in a variety of different scenarios and in a variety of different ways. We also monitor vegetation. That gives us a really long-term idea of how the water table is changing. So obviously, as the environment becomes wetter and that water table becomes more stable, it changes the vegetation that is able to survive. So we start to see a reduction in the really dominant species like Millennia, and an increase in species that are associated with a more healthy blanket bog environment, things like cotton grasses, sundews, sedges, more coverage of sphagnum, and so on. And we can use those to kind of indicate the health of the environment. We also measure peak depths using those very big, long orange sticks, which very technical piece of kit. You attach all the pieces together and you push it down into the ground until it stops, and then you measure the depth. We also use fixed point photography. So that enables us to see how these landscapes change over time following restoration. But we also look at the ecology as well. So we also monitor birds and invertebrates and dragonflies. So there are, of course, other ways to know that it's working, and that is the return of life to these landscapes, which is absolutely phenomenal once it starts. So this is a video, slightly grainy. You might not be able to see it that well, but I believe, if I remember correctly, he told me that was a common hawker laying its eggs in a pool that had been restored. um, 2 years previously. And the life that returns to these environments after the restoration has taken place, once you introduce pools and water into the landscape, is absolutely phenomenal and incredibly fast as well. So we see huge returns of dragonflies, a variety of species, most notable being the black darter, common hawker, golden ring dragonflies as well, where we've got running water streams associated with the work that we've done. We've seen green emerald damselflies as well. So the kind of upland species specialists, we start to see them returning really, really quickly after the work that we've done. We also see other things return really quickly, so amphibians as well. So this is a site up on Exmoor where some restoration was carried out, and the day after the pools had formed and the water table had risen, there was frog spawn the next day in those pools, which was incredible to see. And then we hope that with this return of life, that more life returns on top of that as well. So we start to see increases in the bird life, like dunlin, curlew, snipe, increase in sundew coverage as well. And then hopefully also hobbies, which are obviously big fans of dragonflies. So why are dragonflies so important to the South West Peatland Partnership? So in the last 3 years, we have started to increasingly monitor dragonflies as an indicator of habitat restoration success. So their sensitivity and rapid responses to change in the environment have made them really good indicators for this for us. It is quite early days for us though, so there was some dragonfly restoration done quite early on in the project. So the project started about 18 years ago, I believe. But the team has been very, very small up until recently when funding has increased. And now that we have expanded as a team, we have more resources available to us. We are now increasing the amount of dragonfly monitoring that we're doing. So we're starting to add it in as part of our kind of regular monitoring program. So far, what we've found with this is huge numbers of increases in black darters on certain sites. So Ockleton Court, the site I showed you earlier that had the bomb craters in it. In 2024, when we surveyed that site for dragonflies, we counted 61 black darters across the survey season, and that was after restoration. And then last year, that doubled, more than doubled to 125 black darters, and we were seeing them emerging en masse. We were also joined by Dave Smallshire and some of your British Dragonfly Society volunteers on that day as well. And it was just really wonderful to see just clouds of black darters appearing, kind of freshly emerged, crinkly wings, really, really beautiful. We're also seeing increases in other species such as the common hawker as well. Some of the sites that have been restored, we find that they are like literally buzzing with dragonflies within sort of 2 years of restoration taking place. It's really exciting to see, and it kind of like for us at the South West Peatland Partnership, although the kind of restoring the hydrological functioning is the main focus of the work that we do, it's the knock-on effects of what we see that happens after that that really drives everybody's passion. So it's the return of the dragonflies, the return of the amphibians, the return of the bird life. It's all of that, I think, personally, that kind of drives us and keeps us going. They're also really amazing for engagement with volunteers as well. So we have a team of volunteers that really love coming out and doing dragonfly surveying with us. And some people are kind of like getting more skilled at this slowly and becoming more confident in their dragonfly ID. That's Steve, my colleague, who works for the National Trust. So Steve is really our in-house dragonfly specialist. He wasn't available today, so I'm doing my best to stand in. And Steve has been training myself up as well, so that I can become more independent with these dragonfly surveys, and means we've got more people in house that are skilled to go out and do these surveys. But it's a really wonderful way to get people out into these habitats and to get them excited about them as well, because they are generally quite inaccessible. a little bit daunting if you're not confident in heading out into what feels like the wilderness. And also, we go out on days where the weather's really nice, and it's quite unusual for us to be able to take people out to the peatlands and the uplands when the sun is shining. Um, and people then get to see them kind of when they're really buzzing with life, and there's just loads happening, and it's just really wonderful. Um, so yeah, we hope to continue this dragonfly surveying now into the future. We've kind of built it into our next 5 years of monitoring. And we're really excited to see how we can start to use this data in a really meaningful way to support the work that we do, um, and to help drive the partnership forwards. Thank you very much.